The way that rule is written is it's possible to actually hit a batter 7 times in high school before they're allowed to go to first base.
Jesse, it's good to have you on the podcast. We've been talking about doing this for a while. You recently contributed to Referee Magazine, and wanted to follow that up by introducing you kind of to who my listeners are on the podcast and on the Umpire Classroom side. But I guess to start, maybe if you just want to introduce yourself and kind of tell us a little bit about your background so that the listeners kind of know who you are.
Well, for those that don't know, Jesse Fagan, been umpiring off and on. Well, started off doing some small stuff way back younger as a kid and things like that, but really didn't get serious about it until about 10 years ago, around the same time you and I met, in fact, to attend Wendelstedt. And that was the time that really kind of keyed in, like, get serious about this, get some legitimate training involved. So from there, I took it to working a lot of high school games initially, staying local, still, had the wife and family and stuff, so couldn't necessarily travel extreme long distances all the time. And at the time, I was also working through schooling after my time in the military. So it was a really great job. And it gave me an idea of like, I haven't been yelled at in a while for, stuff that's not my fault at all. So what can I do to get paid to do that? And then, of course, umpiring comes to mind. So it was fun to get back into it and be serious about it and start to network with those that were local in the area. And of course, to my advantage at the time, I was living just about 20 miles from where the Wendelstedt camp is at. So didn't have to absorb the costs of the hotels and everything. So that played very well into my advantage for that. Since then, progressed up through high school, moved away from Florida and into the Missouri, St. Louis area. Finally started being in a stable enough situation to really try to push going more into the college ranks. So started off 4 years ago now. So since then, been working a lot of predominantly JUCO, NAIA, Division III, baseball. Aspirations of higher, but not necessarily trying to push it because I still want to focus on family time with having, several teenagers in the house. Once they're out of the house, then I'll, reevaluate the situation at that time. But with my adult background particularly in the military, focusing on training and, training up your replacement and giving back. And you're not always going to be the one that's out there doing all this stuff. So you want to be able to trust the people you work around. The training aspect, the knowledge of it, getting that baseline has been extremely important to me. So people like yourself are setting up these kind of training classrooms and being able to put stuff out there for more people to not just get information, but get correct information, get factual rulebook-based information. That's what really drives me to it. And just being glad to be participating in the conversation.
Well, yeah, I'm glad to have you. It's weird to think that umpire school was 9 years ago now.
Yeah.
Been a minute. First of all, I think you're so right on like the D3, NAIA, JUCO. There are people that get like, oh no, I got to be D1. I got to be D1 immediately. Like, slow down, relax, enjoy the challenge. You can learn just as much from working those games or a high school game as you can working at D1. You'll probably learn more at the lower levels because that's where all the weird stuff happens. I try to tell people don't get caught up on that. Enjoy the challenge because you can be just as humbled from working a JV game and something goes wrong. And
yep, absolutely. And of course, a lot of other senior umpires will tell you not everybody can go up and, for example, and get picked up and become a major league umpire. I was older than most of the class, especially anyone that was genuinely like willing to accept an invitation. So the writing was on the wall there. They generally want people younger, and that's fine. But as far as into the college ranks, but again, with my professional background, if you want to advance into a new position, you got to be able to tell an assigner, I've got 100 people that want the 5 open spots I got available. Why should I choose you over the rest of them? Or why should I choose you over somebody that's been in my roster for 10 years already? And it's not just about getting as good as people at that level. You got to give that assigner a reason to think that you're better than them. And I think that especially over the past several years, fewer umpires are doing things, in my opinion, off the field to kind of pull themselves out of the roster, so to speak. People are getting smarter, safer. There's more understanding of what social media can do to destroy a career, whether that's umpiring or something else. I've joked for many years that the 4-letter word of the last 25 years that's ended the most careers is send. followed closely by post. Social media can just kill it. So you got to be able to, build that trust. A lot of folks in the umpiring world will tell you high trust and low maintenance. So people that, I got to be Division I in 5 years. Good luck. That's a tall task, especially because you're going up against a lot of competition who's already proven themselves the last 5, 10, 15, 20 plus years. How are you going to demonstrate that you're better than them?
And the answer for everyone out there is not by emails to the assigner. You're so right that, I'd never thought of it that way, but I can tell you from what I see on my high school board, once every other year we get an umpire that for some reason sends us emails that, new to the association, but coming from somewhere else, sends us emails at 1 or 2 in the morning saying, I'm this good and I should be getting these games. And I just want to make sure I'm getting only varsity and all that. And it's like, you're not helping your cause at all. Like,
not usually.
Tell me when you're going to be on a field that has it's on NFHS network, and let me know when you want me to watch your work, right? But hitting send, I don't know that that's really ever gotten anybody that high ranked, and usually it can't be sent from yourself. You got to try to have the right contacts to send it. And I guess my other note to people would be, if just because somebody says, you're good, man, you could work that level, does not mean they're willing to back you when they go reach out to someone. A lot of people will give the lip service of like, no, man, you're good. When like in the back of their mind, they're thinking, this guy's awful or he's not really there, but they don't want to have that discussion. So people don't buy into the send button.
But now you're touching on another subject that could be a whole other podcast regarding mentoring. And I got a pitch all the time about if you have the ability to be a mentor, please be a mentor. If you don't have a mentor, find a mentor. And it's a balance of some people don't give back as much as others do. Now, granted, there's plenty of people that are great umpires, but there are some people that can be excellent on the field, and they may not be the greatest at translating what they're seeing to critique somebody and the best way to get them to understand it, because there's more than one way to teach. So people that just say, you're good, oh yeah, good game, they don't only want to post game and like really dig into, and then there's a balance of, well, I really don't offer anybody criticism like about their zone or something until they ask me. And it's just many variables to that give and take of who's receptive, who's not. Some people are more receptive. Some people are not. Some people, you see it to where a senior guy starts to give some advice, maybe even the junior person asks a question, they start to give that advice. And then the junior person's like, well, but this. Okay. You know it all. And occasionally we all might be guilty of that at some level here and there. But if you're going to ask the question, you're going to ask, how was my zone? How are my rotations? What'd you see? What'd you see there? And you don't like the honest feedback you get. Life's all about choices, and that involves how you're going to receive that information. So again, I could go into a whole other side of mentorship and training and the elements to that.
Well, it's important. I mean, at the high school level, I think the average crew does a pretty bad post game.
100% agree. And pregame.
And what's funny is, yeah. And what's funny is like the best post game discussions I have are with the guy that's ranked, number 1 in our state. He's a college guy that does some high school games, but he's the guys I have the best post games with because we both know what we're talking about. We'll talk for like 45 minutes about the game and plays that, we got right during the game, but we like the mechanics or just discussing kind of 3 different things. It's a quality of high level officiating that you just don't see enough at the lower levels. And usually that's because, you're either used to running off to the next game or whatever, but it's super important.
And running, not just running off, but getting there late because, you get off work maybe at 4:00 and the game starts at 5. So you're showing up at 4:30 and trying to get dressed. And maybe there's not been a decision yet about who's working the plate and this, that, and the other. And you're just trying to get onto the field on time. Then you're all of a sudden in the second inning and you're like, oh, we didn't pregame what we're going to do in this situation or that situation. And yes, there are standardized umpiring mechanics, and that is a fantastic place to start. When in doubt, go with the standard mechanics that are in like the CCA manual and things like that. But there are occasionally nuances. Not everybody has the same physical ability. And one common example I give is, in a 2-man system, runner at first is stealing on the pitch, and there's a clean base hit to the outfield, does that plate umpire have the physical ability to get in position to make a call of that R1 making it to third base? Because that could be a 17-year-old kid with blazing speed. Do they have the physical ability to do it? And pre-gaming that, if they know that they don't, if they know that there's no situation to where they're going to be able to make it to third base with a runner stealing on the pitch, then pre-game that so your partner already knows. And you can always leave it to, we'll communicate, and I'll, if you hear me say I'm here, then here. If I'm not, then I'll say that I'm not, and that's fine too. However you pre-game that is how that's going to work out for that game. But to not pre-game that, whatever it's going to be, is a failure. And you're starting your game up with a failure right there.
And it inevitably will show up in your game at some point. And there's 2 worst case scenarios. Both of you make a call or neither of you make the call. But the only way to prepare for that is just to talk about it in the pregame, know your partner. And, we don't have enough umpires for you to say, oh, well, if you can't do that, you shouldn't be working this level. The rule book says you can work in a wheelchair, and we might need people to do that with the recruiting we've got going on. So, yeah, you got to learn how you're going to work with those people.
Yeah. And even more often than just whether there's physical limitations, whether it's a wheelchair or, it's kind of extreme, but still possible. It generally also comes a lot more to umpires who work both softball and baseball. And there are different rotations at high school level for softball and baseball. When you have a pregame that, it can create confusion, and suddenly now you got 2 umpires at a base, and you're really, really hoping that you guys are making the same call if that's what ends up happening. But that should never happen.
That's a great point. I think we're fortunate here in Georgia, but our high school softball is actually a fall sport here, not a spring sport. So we don't have that overlap, which we have a lot of guys that do both, but thankfully they're not going baseball to softball to baseball to softball 3-4 times a week.
I did try that in Florida for 1 year. And in Florida, it's a spring sport for both. And I quickly realized I was becoming sloppy at both because I was trying to get really good, but I could tell the muscle memory from one was carrying over to the other, and it was making me look sloppy. So I personally had to stop it. For you that can do it, congratulations, more power to you. It made me just sloppy. And you gotta know your limitations with some of this stuff. It takes time to try and master both of those correctly. So
yeah. And I think the best way to think of it is like, they're not the same sport.
No, there are plenty of differences.
They're not the same sport.
If you automatically assume that just because you can do one, you can automatically know everything about the other, you are setting yourself up for failure.
Yeah. And we know how difficult the NFHS rules are for people that think they know baseball from watching it on TV to NFHS games. Yeah, softball's probably the same way. Which I guess is a good transition because that's what your article was about. We did not plan that transition, but it worked out pretty well, actually.
Segues right into the rule differences. And my sympathies go to those that especially are in the South, Texas, Florida, Arizona, Southern California, that have baseball that can happen, I jokingly say, 53 weekends a year. Because it seems like there's never a weekend off. Always kind of weekend tournaments going on, and you can do Little League on a Tuesday, a high school game on a Thursday, and then you're doing some random travel ball tournament on Friday, Saturday, maybe Sunday too. You're easily dealing with multiple rule differences all the time. And I was invested in that for several years also when I was down in Florida, and it is exhausting because if you're going to do it right, you need to have an exceptional understanding, not just of OBR, which a lot of them use that as their baseline, but NFHS, and know all their little nuances and differences that can happen between, perfect game, USSSA, prospect wire, and maybe you throw in, I also do college down too, so I do some JUCO stuff. You don't want to be the one enforcing a high school rule during a college game.
That's tough because this is my first year kind of messing around with college ball, and it's, you think for most people, they know the pro rules from TV. Well, they think they know the pro rules. They don't know the pro rules, but they think they know the pro rules from TV. Then they say, okay, I want to get serious about umpiring myself. Obviously, you probably start at the high school level, maybe do some travel stuff. And so then you learn like the high school rulebook and OBR are very different. And then you add in college and it's like, oh no, it doesn't base off one or the other. It's its own rulebook. It's a lot to learn.
Yeah.
You talked in the article about different rules, and understanding the bases So I think we said there were 4 baseline rule sets that you kind of listed?
In our country anyway, there are 4 rule sets that are the baselines for pretty much any other rule set. And my definition of what's a baseline, when you look at a rule set, do they have like either on their top page or a back page, some other listing that says, we will use this rule set unless otherwise stated below? For example, I use certain recreational leagues that will have certain rules, or a travel ball tournament will say USSSA will use a certain rule set, but unless otherwise stated, they back up to, I think, USSSA. Well, USSSA is a little tricky because they're founded in OBR, official baseball rules, which is of course the baseline for Major League Baseball, but they also have NFHS references in it. So they kind of touch in 2 baselines, whereas Perfect Game is founded with NFHS, American Legion is OBR. So those 4 baselines, of course, are OBR, which is the baseline for pretty much everything else because it came first. Everything else, whether you want to admit it or not, was based off that in some way. But you don't look into a college rule book and see somewhere where it says, well, we're going to use these rules, and if it's not listed, then we're going to use official baseball rules. It doesn't say that. It doesn't refer off to some other baseline. So you have official baseball rules, you have NCAA, you have NFHS, and you have Little League. And everyone wants to say, well, Little League's OBR based. Again, everything, all the other 3 are somehow OBR based, again, because they came first, and that was the initial foundation. But there is nothing in the Little League rulebook that says, if something's missing in here, we're going to defer to OBR to that effect.
Right.
Whereas your USSSA, Perfect Game, Legion, USA Baseball, Prospect Wire, NCSA, Dizzy Dean, all these other stuff, they'll have something in there that says, we're using this unless otherwise stated, or some other language, again, that defers to something else as a catch-all.
It's a lot to keep up with it. And not only do you have to talk about that, but as you know, going from one situation to the other, your mechanics are going to change and your game management style and how we're going to handle situations. If I'm working a high school game, we're going to try very hard not to toss a coach. But if I'm working some travel thing, if I'm working Perfect Game, I'll drop 5 coaches in the first 5 minutes. I don't care. I'm not taking any crap. This is nonsense travel ball anyways. But those are things you got to talk about in your pregame.
Well, you mentioned that. NFHS, I like the fact that they're trying to put a point of emphasis on their warning system. They got a verbal warning, they got a written warning that can restrict the coach to the dugout, and of course the ejection. And the idea is to use those steps whenever possible. Of course, a coach can do, or player can do something to pop right off and go right to an ejection. And if that happens, you got to do it. But to your point, when you're doing travel ball, well, what's the default within Perfect Game? Well, the default baseline in Perfect Game is NFHS. So unless they've got something in their rule set to discuss game management, then they're going to default to that verbal and written warning system to try to get those in before there's an ejection. Whereas at college level, you do have just the official NCAA warning. If you try to say at a college game, again, this is your written warning, you're restricted at the dugout, that's going to, again, create more questions than you probably want to have to answer. That's your game management. You got to know the differences. But then official baseball rules, if you're doing USSSA, doesn't have that. So again, if you try some kind of written warning in the restricted coach, I don't believe that's in the USSSA rules at all. So that's just your game management side to understand the differences of the game you're working that day. And that goes beyond any pitching requirements or courtesy runners, force play slide rule differences, collisions at the plate, what's obstruction. Of course, OBR has type 1, type 2, but then NFHS just has obstruction. And every obstruction in the high school level is a delayed dead ball. So you have to know these differences and you have to have a mastery of them. You are expected to have a mastery of them for that game that you're working that day. So when you work 7 days a week and you're blending in all your games, I've been there where some days drift into another, especially in July when you're letting off heat exhaustion. So I think I first heard this phrase at Wendelstedt, where umpiring is a profession where you're expected to be perfect from day one and then get better from there. So blend all these together. And I firmly believe that people that have to mix and match and do, again, Little League, high school, all this weekend travel ball, in many ways, they kind of have it harder than those people that are working the highest levels of college ball or working in pro ball, minor leagues or professional baseball, because those people pretty much focus on one rule set. that, and they're getting paid very well to the point where it gives them a little more freedom to make sure they focus and be masters of that one rule set, to where those doing travel ball and things like that, they're umpiring by volume and trying to make their money off of working 500 games a year. So the ability to master all these rules while you're driving, everywhere and trying to get your gear washed, hopefully, for the next day. Don't umpire by what you pull out of the trunk that day, please.
Well, it's tough, and it's really hard that's why it's so hard to get training for these newer umpires as well. It's really easy to think, okay, we're going to put a training together. It's not going to be Windleston. It's not going to be 5 weeks, but we want our guys to start with like a 3 Monday nights in a row. We're going to do training for our little league games and stuff. And you can't do that for little league because it's not a profession for these people. It's a part-time gig, and they're probably not doing it for the money. I wouldn't do it without the money. They're probably not doing it for the money as much as it is they want to get back to the game. They like umpiring. So, you have to balance, how realistic is it for us to train these people, in person before the season starts or whatnot. That, the lower the level, the harder it is to do that. And that kind of leads to this importance of online and virtual training and things like this.
Well, my message right here, I'm looking at every single person who claims to be a tournament director or an assigner, especially at the lower levels, when you're in situations where you may be hiring somebody with less than 1 or 2 years of umpiring experience. If you are not offering them some kind of training or doing some kind of a vetting to measure at least their basic baseball 101 knowledge, understanding fair foul, understanding where to start when you're on the bases and there's a runner on second, where to stand, where to be, and basic fundamental rules of baseball, then you are setting your league up for failure. And I've been pitching this, particularly these past few years, in this local rural community, because they're just trying to hire anybody and put them out there. And I understand they need bodies, but I'm like, yes, but again, how many problems do you run into because you just throw somebody out there who says, I know baseball because I played it 17 years ago. And then all of a sudden there's a different argument and you hear the umpire saying things like, I let it because the hands are part of the bat. Fundamental basics.
Yeah.
And this is not the kind of thing that's got to take 3 weekends in a row before the season. You could seriously set up small little true false tests. I've seen that method used, just 2 1-hour Saturdays when the kids have practices before the season, come out and we'll do some manned practices there. Those won't be paid. And they're like, well, I'm not getting paid for the training, so I'm not going to go. Well, there is a basic fundamental bare minimum of knowledge we need to expect umpires, people that we're putting in an umpiring position, to have before we put them on the field. And if you are not setting that standard to where you expect them to understand the difference between fair foul, safe out, where to stand, then you're setting your league up for failure. And it's going to cause you more headaches during the season than it's worth.
And if one of those guys somehow survives, 1 year of doing it, and they come back the next year somehow, they haven't really learned the skills to do it. But then the new people coming in that year see that person and go, oh, they have it figured out. And then that person's setting your baseline. And that's not who you want to be doing that.
Bad habits, just like you have, whether it's a recreational league or little league or whatever it is for these youth sports, which is where your newest umpires are usually going to start. Very few people come in and the first game they ever umpire is a varsity high school game. They're usually doing something on a smaller field, 12U and below. That's even more critical time to give them some baseline of knowledge, because the people coaching that often don't have, and they only know the rules they see on TV. As we know, overwhelmingly, a lot of the rules that apply in Major League Baseball games that they've watched all their life don't apply at these younger levels. So when these umpires people that you put into these umpiring positions don't have that knowledge, and it could create frustration to the point of arguments, and they're tired of the coaches arguing, and they're tired of this and they're tired of that. They quit midseason, or they don't come back the next year. So just like your idea for sustaining a league, you want the players to come back next year so you can have a league again next year. You want them to have fun, be safe, learn the game, but come back next year. You should want that out of your umpires. You should want that retention. Because as you know from the stats that are well documented nationwide, there's a huge percentage of people who get into officiating sports and they quit before year 3, or certainly before year 4. The retention is horrible And a lot of that comes from a lack of understanding. When you don't know the rules yourself and you get slammed for it, I don't need this for $30 a game or whatever. And most people don't. They don't need that kind of stress for $30 a game. But what did you do as the assigner to help set them up for success? They don't know what they don't know. What are you doing to set them up for success? If you want to be the assigner or that board president, I put the responsibility on you. They don't know the right questions to ask. And if you don't, accept that you may not have the knowledge you need to share and give to them. You may have to spend a little money to hire out some outside help to come in and train. You may have to squeeze a little more money to hire people that are willing to work for higher wages who may already have some training. And then they can be mentors. It's not all entirely solved by money, but it helps. But I just have to put that responsibility on the tournament directors and assigners first.
Well, and then, you get, because in my rec assigning, I run into this. Every rec park, they use whatever their base set of rules are, and then they modify their park rules. And it's always funny when they say, these are our park rules. And every park has different park rules, but it's like they don't realize at the same time. I try for my groups to have roughly the same umpires there every weekend working games. But that's not the case, and especially in other places, it's less and less that. And umpires are going to get confused moving from one rec rule set to the other, especially when they tell you, "Oh, we're modifying OBR." Yeah, we're OBR, but these are the exceptions, slide rule or whatnot, whatever. But they don't talk anything about uniform requirements for coaches, helmets for coaches,
buckets,
pitch clock, game clock, all that. They don't talk about that stuff. But you can't say we're doing this and this when you don't really address everything that you obviously don't want to enforce.
Yeah, I'm well with you on that. I've got a local league that loves to say, well, we just prefer to use OBR versus high school. I'm like, have you read the high school stuff? Well, no, not really. But you can't really compare something you haven't read. But as soon as they say that, I'm like, so you're going to have a 3-pitcher minimum requirement. Every pitcher's got to throw to at least 3 minimum batters. Where are your 18-inch bases? So, but to your point, there are rule differences that OBR uses that you see on TV. Is that what you really want? Well, we're going to amend that. So you end up with 3 pages of amendments. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen umpires, they didn't make it to any of the preseason training. They show up for a game and I'm stopping by there after work and I'm watching. And I see something happen, it has to do with when runners can advance, whether they can steal or not, or this, that, and the other happens. And they're confused about it. I'm like, I'm glad you got that sorted out, but didn't you read that on the rule sheet? They're like, what rule sheet? The city's rule sheet that they have for their rules that apply. And they're like, they didn't give me one. Again, I don't blame the umpire for not having that. I blame the president, the board president, the tournament director, or the assigner, whoever put them on the field and didn't set them up for success. You put somebody out there and didn't even give them a list of your city rules. Help.
Well, and there's a local city I was talking to about helping them with the signing. I'm talking to the guy and he said, yeah, we use NFHS rules, but we also have our own rule book that we use. And it's like a little 30-page printout thing that's an addendum to the rules. They're like, yeah, these are park rules. And, I tried to go through it real quick, but you can't quickly go through it because it includes, here's where you have to live to register at this fee, at the city fee versus out of the city. And, here's the birth dates. It was all the stuff that matters to the parents in the league, but doesn't have a thing to do with the umpires. But obviously, the more pages you put in there, the less likely it is your umpires are going to be able to read it, understand it, find what they do need, to then still point back to a rule book that they say, yeah, we play based off of this. And you're like, well, you don't even mention the modifications you would need to do what you're doing versus what they're doing. I mean, just the fact that if you say you're doing NFHS baseball, if your park modification does not say anything about coaches' uniforms, you're probably not playing NFHS baseball because you're rec. There's no rec league where the guys the adult men are wearing baseball pants, which is fine. I'm not expecting them to, but these are the little things that if you don't address them in your local rules, okay, now you're not really playing NFHS or your rules. You've got these loose understanding of what youth baseball should be at this level,
right? And
which varies.
You're talking about unintended consequences, and you're absolutely correct. And I've seen what you're talking about, where you got 30 pages of stuff, and you're like, are we really trying to get these guys to know what the birth date is of every kid and whether they're age eligible? No, that's a league thing. So my push for these local leagues is at most whatever rule sheet that you want for the on-field rules, whatever differences you want to focus on for the on-field rules for that age group. And I absolutely understand if it's going to be different for your 8-year-olds versus your 10-year-olds versus your 12-year-olds or whatever. That's fine. But for your 12U league, no more than 2 pages. Because then what you can do with 2 pages of that information is you can print it out on a piece of paper, front and back. Umpire has it right in their ball bag or their pocket or whatever. And if they need to, they can address that on the field. Because I don't want to bring a rule book on the field. You're working a 10 or 12U recreational game. This is not your professional job. You're not going to have a master's degree in OBR plus all these amendments. Take a beat, de-escalate the situation from the coach is yelling this, the coach is yelling that, fans are yelling, hold on. Let's forget what I think, forget what you think. Let's bring out what the city rule is. The city rule says this. All right. And that's what we're going to go off of. It's no longer what I say. Let's just bring it out. And that way it's a concise little checklist. You've got it right there in your pocket. 2 pages, not 30, 2, front and back. Let's limit it to 2.
Yeah.
And then there's nothing to argue. Well, I don't like that. Well, that's a neat story. I say that in training. I don't say that on the field. Like, I understand your opinion, but that's the rule. So after this game, if you want to have a discussion with the league about their rules, that's for you to make. But I'm adjudicating, I'm ruling based on what this rule says, and we're going to keep the game moving. Please head back to the dugout of your coach's box. And
so like the rec parks I assign, one of them, they have a laminated set of the age group rules at each field attached to the fence, which I think is great. And for umpires out there, most people listening to this are certainly not professional full-time umpires. You're doing this part-time because you love it, you enjoy it. At the levels below professional and maybe like top-level collegiate, don't be afraid to change a call because you think about it a little longer. You don't need to live and die with the first call you make or the first thing you say. Take a breath, get together with your partner, talk about it, say, hold on, okay, we're going to go check it over here. And that's not a reflection that you don't know the rules, especially in those lower levels where it's age group things. Mm-hmm. It's okay to say, let me make sure I've got this right for this age group. Or if both coaches come to you and say, hey, this is actually the modification for our league, don't die on the hill of trying to convince them that's not the case. Right. Just say, okay, I missed that. We'll do that one. Like I've been trying to tell people, like, you don't need to die on any hill when working anything below the professional level. And certainly don't be afraid to get together and talk about it. There's a lot of times where, especially as you change rule sets, great example, my first year doing high school ball after pro ball, pitcher, runners on third and first, pitcher steps, pumps to third, turns, throws to first. I go, time, that's a balk. Point at the runner at third, and I go, you, third base, you, first base. And the coach comes out to me and he goes, so you called a balk there, you're not going to give him base? I said, you and I both know that's not the high school rule. They're going to stay where they were. But, we're going to make mistakes, especially the lower we are from professional baseball. And that's okay. We just need to be willing to accept that at times. Don't die on any hill. Be willing to get together. And if I needed to, I'd get with my partner and talk about it. But
and it's not just so much about, the lower you are from Major League Baseball, or professional baseball, it's the reason those people generally don't make those mistakes as often. Mistakes still happen. They're still human, but they don't happen as often is because repetition, training. They've got the reps in. Whereas to our point earlier, a lot of these lower levels, you don't get several months of repetition. You didn't necessarily go off to 5+1 week of umpire school and then all the training and preparation that comes in the following months from there, getting those reps in. So it comes with reps. It comes with time. Now, if you're not pretty much everywhere, baseball season's starting or about to start. If you haven't already been in your rule books for months already, you're behind the power curve as far as refreshing yourself or maintaining what knowledge you have. So you got to get those repetitions in and timing. You have to mentally prepare yourself for the game that you're working that day. So to your point on balks, high school level, their immediate dead ball. But so many people then move on to, of course, travel ball. Overwhelmingly, even travel ball that uses NFHS as a baseline, from my opinion, the very first rule they change and amend is making balks a delayed dead ball. And
Yeah.
So you have to slow your timing down. And I say this all the time. You're better off to wait to make the right call than rush to the wrong one. Whether that's, a fair foul call, and maybe you're getting blocked on a squibbler up the first base line, or on a balk call, and maybe you accidentally let it play out. And you're like, oh, we're under high school rules. Yep, let's kill this. Once you kill it, or once you call foul ball on a ball that's hit the ground like that, you're kind of stuck now. So when in doubt, let it play out. And you can always bring yourself back and be like, oh, so like in your feint to third base, and fake to first, if you just let that play out for a moment, high school, wait, that's legal. So, it just comes to that timing and how you have to pregame yourself to focus in on the game and the rule set you're working that day. That's where you're expected to be a master of those rules on that day in that moment for that game. Isn't Georgia having some fun with that?
Yeah, so we're doing an experimental rule this year on delayed dead ball box. And, as we talk about it at the leadership level, our biggest message we're trying to get to umpires is, if you're going to make a mistake, leave the ball alive and correct it later.
When in doubt, let it play out.
We've got a cheat sheet. Exactly. We've got a cheat sheet you can put in your pocket. And after the play ends, you can pull it out and you can say, it'll tell you, what should it have been, an immediate dead ball? Should it be, delayed? Are we acknowledging but letting the play stand? It tells you everything you need to know. But you can only use that if you let the whole thing play out. So take your time, watch it. And then don't be afraid to get together and say, you know what, that was supposed to be an immediate dead ball because of XYZ. We're going to go ahead and we just need to change it and correct it. And then just go tell the coach, listen, we let it play out, but, we got together. We know this is actually the right way to have done it. We can fix that. We're going to fix that.
Or maybe not immediate, like the moment the pitcher balks immediate, like the standard high school rule, but then some element to where they throw it or where they pitch it, if it's caught by the catcher, that's when it becomes dead at that moment. So when you go to a delayed dead ball balk, there's a lot of variety to exactly the moment when the play becomes dead, if it becomes dead at all. So I applaud Georgia for doing this. I look forward to it becoming more widespread, because I just see a lot of fundamental flaws with the way that the language is written at the high school level for immediate dead balls on balks and illegal pitches.
Yeah. Which is also a great example, right? Like if a pitcher, they think they're in the windup, but they've got their foot parallel to the mound or to the rubber for their first pitch and they throw it.
Yeah, the true hybrid.
You're going to call it dead ball.
Or the classic misunderstanding is they're in the set. This person, high school pitcher pitches from the set all the time. Well, under high school, you still have to come to a discernible stop if runners are on or not. So if they just go ahead and roll through it in high school, even with no runners on, that's an illegal pitch. And the thing is, it's immediately dead there. And I got to go on you're opening up the door here. The way that rule is written is it's possible to actually hit a batter 7 times in high school before they're allowed to go to first base. Uniform play, realistically not going to happen. And if it does, it's going to have multiple ejections involved.
Yeah.
And people want to argue with that. That can't happen. That can't happen. Quick scenario. Pitcher's upset. Close pitch. He walks a batter. So now we have R1, no count. All right. And all these times he's going from this set. He balks. He rolls through a set and throws a pitch, hits a batter. Well, that's a balk. And unlike in college and pros, when you hit a batter in this situation, that delayed dead ball would advance the batter, runner, and R1 because they're being forced to advance.
On base. Yeah.
That's not true in high school. That became immediately dead the moment they balked, which means the moment they rolled through that set. All right, it's a balk. Pitcher stay here or batter stay here. You still have a no count. Runner on second. They've been hit once. Same thing happens. They balk. They hit the batter. Runner on third. Same thing happens. They balk. They hit the runner. Hit the batter. Now they've been hit 3 times. By now, some game management probably needs to be involved. And there is a rule for thinking that perhaps a pitcher's intentionally throwing at a batter. It's probably going to have an ejection at this point, but getting past the game management side of it. But now the batter's been hit 3 times, or one is scored, but they still have no count. To our point, under high school rules, an illegal pitch is an immediate dead ball. He must come set. He's just got bad mechanics, and he does the same thing. He doesn't come set. He rolls through it. It's an illegal pitch. By rule, that's an immediate dead ball, but he hit the batter again. Well, now there's nobody on base and nobody's advancing. So what's the penalty? It's just ball 1 for the illegal pitch. Do it again. Ball 2. So now he's been hit, put a runner on second, put a runner on third, put a runner to score a runner. Ball 1, ball 2, ball 3. Finally, on the 7th time they're getting hit, they're getting awarded first base, but it's not for being hit by a pitch. It's because they're being awarded ball 4 on the illegal pitch. I've had some people try to argue, well, you could actually have it 9 times because what if the batter, if the pitch is in the strike zone, but the batter kind of goes in there, now the pitch is in the strike zone. I'm like, no, that's still just a ball because it became immediately dead the moment of the balk or illegal pitch. 7 times. I've heard rumors of baseball games being impacted by an illegal pitch or a balk being called, and the batter hits a game-tying home run, a 3-run home run, but sorry, that's just a balk. Bring everybody back, and then they don't come back and tie the game up now. It just...
And, the illegal pitch is a great example because that is one that you're most likely going to see with, obviously no runners on base. Usually, when I've seen it called in a game, it's usually from the hybrid or something like that, an illegal delivery. But the base umpire is going to yell time. That's an illegal pitch. But no one's going to notice until after the pitch is thrown. They're just not going to be able to be loud enough to get that attention. So you're going to have one pitch thrown over the plate, potentially, that could potentially be hit, but you're killing it immediately. And, then whatever happens is just ignored. But
and
why are we taking that off the table?
And that's a common time. It's because when you start to see that illegal pitch, they're actually using the legitimate hybrid, which is having your foot parallel to the plate, which in high school, there's only 2 positions. And that is you're either parallel to the plate, which means you're in the set, or you're not parallel, which means you're in the windup.
You're not parallel.
Some people get confused. They're like, oh, you have to be perpendicular. No, you could be at a 45-degree angle in high school. Well, what is that? Then that's the hybrid. No, that's, according to high school, that's the windup. Well, why? Because it's not parallel. There's no language in there now to where it says it has to be perpendicular. You're either parallel for the set or you're not parallel for the windup. So to your point, in the set, though, you can't go into that step backwards wind-up motion. You call it. And that's a lot of times because I'm calling this and I'm screaming this time, because this you can call time because it is an immediate dead ball that, rattles the pitcher enough to where he loses his grip and hits the batter. Now people are upset. Why doesn't he get first base? Because it was an illegal pitch or a balk or something. But it's not my rule.
Not my rule. Yeah. And that's still the better scenario versus the home run. The home run is the worst. And I've not had it happen, but I've heard of it happening in other people's games where balking a kid, it's a home run or game tying run, whatever. And we're taking it off the board because we correctly did our job, but it just hurts the wrong team.
I have seen it happen once. It wasn't in my game. It was doing travel ball stuff for a league, an entity that used NFHS rules. And of course, I think by the next year they changed. Now they modified it too by the next year. Or now that's a delayed dead ball balk for that reason. They didn't want to take away a home run from a kid because of a pitcher's poor mechanics. So I don't blame them for changing it. Yeah. By no means am I on an NFHS board, but I've heard some whispers of they're looking at changing it. Will it happen for 2026? I don't know. If I had a vote, I would say for common sense and fair play, it's time to change it, especially for this. When you look at the entire, I heard this word a long time ago and I like it, baseball ecosystem. High school is the only one that as a standard makes balks an immediate dead ball. So if you start off in one of these recreational leagues or something that uses OBR, and that's one of the first things they modify, or Little League, which uses delayed dead balls for both balks and illegal pitches. So for years from, when they start having open bases, whether that's 10 years old, 12 years old in travel ball or Little League 13, 14, they have a delayed dead ball. And that's the rule players are learning, whether they realize it or not. That's the rule that should be used. And they go to high school. Now it's immediate. But then they move on to college and it's delayed again. And high school or in pros, it's delayed. So every other rule set, both younger and older, makes a delayed dead ball. Why the change? And most people just try to pitch that high school rules are the way they are for safety reasons. Safety. It's all about player safety. How is it adding more player safety to this 17-year-old in high school versus the 15-year-old who's playing still Little League or something, or 14-year-old, or is off doing travel ball, and that's what they're learning and that's what they're doing. What data are we using to say it's more safe to keep an immediate dead ball in the equation? Whereas if NFHS went away from it, and again, loving that Georgia's a test bed for this, I'm hoping we collect a lot of data to help support driving it wider, and maybe more states will go to some amendments, which is in their purview. Other states, you can amend NFHS rules. It says that right in the first or second page of the NFHS rulebook. States can amend certain rules, and they do all the time. And I hope this just furthers the effort. If every single level of sports, why don't we just go to one rule set? Well, if every rule set made illegal pitches and balks and delayed dead balls, then we no longer have a second set of rules and interpretations and enforcements to learn. Whether we're umpires, players, coaches, fans, it's all the same. You still may not fully understand how to enforce it as the, passive fan, but for umpiring, you're going to learn one way to do it. And as far as the ecosystem goes, isn't that better? Minimizing confusion.
Well, when you think about like what it takes to recruit umpires, especially at the lower levels, the less modifications you have, the better. The easier it is for your umpires, and frankly, the more similar the game is that you're officiating to the game that's on TV. The more similar there, the less differences, the less nonsense we have to hear on the field complaining about it. You think of like, take holding, for example, in high school football used to be a spot foul behind the line of scrimmage. It's not anymore for anybody going out there, but that's a great example of one that like people yell, you're screwing that up. Like, it's a different game. The intentional grounding used to be that way in high school football as well, but like people didn't know those differences. But when you create different differences from what's on TV to what you're doing, that's just another point where fans are going to, they might be incorrect in getting on the official, but they're still going to do it. And then it's just more for your officials to try to learn. Yeah. It's really hard to do.
There are definitely rules out there that need to be adjusted and need to be different from the professional levels. There are certain things involving, especially things that come into contact, collisions at the plate and things like that. I'll just spit this out there. I like dispelling myths. Under those 4 baselines I mentioned, Major League Baseball, college, high school, Little League, under none of those 4 rule sets is there a must slide rule. Not a single one. Those usually come at lower recreational levels to where they've had issues over liability of coaches who don't know how to train how to slide are trying to teach kids how to slide. And of course, those fields aren't exactly even all the time. Sometimes they're rocky. Kids are getting hurt. Now somebody wants to sue the league or sue this coach, and they just like, you know what? If we can't teach them how to properly slide, then there's no mandatory must slide. Or some leagues mandate you must slide at the plate, or you must slide it at this base if there's a play, or it's an out. And again, you got rule modifications. So however they want to navigate, handle sliding, okay. Just don't assume that there's a must slide rule. Well, it's like that in all of baseball. No, there is not. So, but I understand if for your league, you want to put in restrictions for sliding for whatever you feel is best for the 10-year-olds in your local league, by all means do that. Just keep it clear and transparent. Definitely have that on that sheet clearly defined for these umpires and coaches to read. Give them those sheets before the game, before the season.
Yeah, and have it be, just remember, you only get to add so many modifications. So pick wisely. What are the areas that actually need that? The wider you get with it, the harder it gets for the officials. And like even with the no slide rule thing, you get into a lot of what ifs. Like no head first slides. Well, the kid didn't head first slide. He tripped and fell head first, but and there wasn't a play. It all gets very messy really quickly. It's just those little things. And that's one thing too with like OBR and even NCAA rules now. They're not written for youth baseball because they become more and more reliant on replay and having 4 officials on the field. Look at blocking the plate, right? At the MLB level, blocking home plate. You'll never see a major league umpire call that live on the field. They always go to replay to enforce that. We don't have replay at our games. They don't even have replay at AAA. So what, like, are you really going to use the OBR rules when you're not when you don't have the overall resources. It's same with NCAA.
And over 99% of umpires will not ever officiate a game that has legitimate video replay. At least not. That number may drop, in the next 15, 20 years, and maybe some high schools will start doing it someday somewhere, or lower levels, Division 2, Division 3, junior college would get there first probably. But less than 1 out of 100 umpires right now are going to work games that involve some form of video replay. So we can't even really consider that as an option for some
why
things.
would you
have to give people that have the least amount of training the greatest understanding on a rule interpretation that's intended? Let's be serious. Official baseball rules. Who is the intended audience for official baseball rules? That is written for professional paid athletes. That's the intended audience for those coaches and players at the professional levels, whether that's international leagues or minor leagues or major leagues. That's the intended target audience.
Yeah.
But you get these parents of 10 and 12-year-olds that are like, oh, I'm preparing my kid, for the next level. Are you? Because the next level is high school.
High school. And they're way, 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 way more likely to play that than they are to ever play MLB. And to be honest, your kid's probably not even playing that, but we'll get to that later.
I wouldn't even dive into that. But whether your kid ever makes it to the major leagues or not, what are the chances that your kid's going to make it to the major leagues without playing high school first?
Yeah, exactly.
Realistically, it's not going to happen. If your kid is good enough to develop into becoming a Major League Baseball player, there's an extremely high chance that they are going to play in high school at some level. So they're going to have to operate under high school rules. So it confuses me why any league that involves under 18-year-old players does not use high school or little league as their baseline. Why not? Because that would make things easier for you as coaches, and maybe you live in a rural area and the head coach of the local high school uses a lot of fathers of players volunteer because they don't have a budget for, half a dozen paid coaches. Mm-hmm. Okay, that happens. I get it. But to keep that pipeline of knowledge going, what if, from the time they started off in T-ball and coach pitch and kid pitch and moving on up to 10U and 12U, so on and so forth, what if this entire time their baseline of rule knowledge is NFHS, and then you modify it from there? And then you don't have to worry about, minimum pitching requirements and what size the bases might be, or action clocks, even though the 20-second timer is, of course, still in the high school. Well, it's a different conversation. But then you are genuinely preparing them for that next level, which is junior varsity or maybe even varsity, going right into varsity baseball. You are preparing them for the next level. And believe me, if they get a chance to go off to college or the pros, it's extremely doubtful that you're going to be the one coaching them. So you need to place some trust in those college and professional coaches. They'll teach them the rule sets for those levels. Let's focus on where they are and what their next step will be to minimize confusion for the player, the coaches, the fans. Wouldn't that, in the grand scheme of things, be a better fit for the entire baseball ecosystem to get them through high school?
Yeah, well, it's better for the umpires.
And for the umpires. Now, all the way through, I can just focus on a high school baseline because let's face it, when I'm not here doing recreational stuff for $30 a game or whatever, I might be doing JV or high school ball, taking care of my community, kind of giving back. I can focus on one rule set. I don't have to worry about OBR. I don't have to worry about NCAA stuff because, my kid's playing in the 16U and it's a college prospect thing, so they want to try and use college rules. If they're good enough for that, okay, cool. But let those coaches worry about those rule differences on that. Focus on where they are and get them to that next step. Help them be successful where they are and in the next year. And then 5 years from now, that will take care of itself if they've got the talent. But you can save so much stress by just setting things up at the high school level or little leagues if you got a local little league. Not everybody does, but just my 2 cents on the matter to help the umpiring ecosystem get better. Because I know there's people that, who are umpires that also are tournament directors, also are assigners, things like that. So just something to think about to make things simpler on your entire group, in my mind.
On everyone, everyone involved. Well, Jesse, I think that's, a great kind of summary of the article and what we're driving at. And hopefully we're able to kind of get, again, cut down the number of things that people want to modify, to getting those in. And then if we can just teach new umpires one rule book, that's all you need. You're very far from umpiring in professional baseball, so you don't need to learn that one. But it's very realistic that in your first year or second year, you could be umpiring high school baseball, regardless of where you start, so long as you're not a high schooler yourself. So learn that rule set, and that'll be the place for most of us umpire, and just make it easier for people. But I think that's a great topic to bring up and try to hopefully, get more umpires to really promote that to their local groups. Hey, let's play. We stop playing OBR. You're not OBR. We're very far from it, and we get farther from it every day. Let's move more towards NFHS or Little League, something that's written for what we're doing, not what they're doing.
Right, for the intended audience. The student athlete, legitimate is what it's written for. And for those of you that are, first starting off, kind of part ways with this thought, maybe you've been doing this 10 years, maybe you've been doing this 2 years, and the rule book is still overwhelming. That's why I talk about year-round reading or whatever. I just got to make my pitch for the most undervalued. Well, first of all, NFHS, you come with a case book and a rule book. Don't underestimate the case book. There's a lot of extremely valuable knowledge in here that makes the plays kind of come to life for you. But if there's one section where younger, newer umpires ask, well, I was looking up this and I couldn't find it. I was looking up this on base running. I couldn't find it. Well, I want to know about this about obstruction, but it's not in there with the base running stuff and I couldn't find it. If you don't know where to start, Rule 2. Rule 2 covers the definitions of things like interference, obstruction, fair and foul, things like that. You don't know where to start. Think about it, when you're in elementary school, if there's a word you don't know, where should the teacher tell you to go? Should they just give you the answer? Or at least in my day, it was go to a dictionary, or at least go to some dictionary that's on your phone or something like that. You're looking up the definition of a word you don't know. If you don't think you fully understand obstruction or interference, or even if you think you do, go look into Rule 2 at the definition of these things. And it's going to open your eyes to, oh, there might be a nugget in there I didn't know. Or, well, I thought that one might be under base running awards, but it's actually hiding here. That fake tag thing, I know fake tag is obstruction, but I couldn't find it. What I do with it, it's under obstruction. It's under the definition of obstruction. Go to Rule 2, study and learn those definitions. That is going to further inform you and kind of fill in some blanks when you go into things about Rule 6 with pitching, Rule 7 with batting, so on and so forth. It fills in those gaps and it starts to connect a lot more dots for you.
It's a great spot for any umpire, and you're so right. And by the way, people always ask me, where do you see that you can't restrict a player to the dugout? Like, well, actually, the best place to find that is not in the Rule 3. It's in Rule 2 in the definition of penalty. We won't get into that now, but there's certain things that you only learn by looking at those definitions. So it's a great spot for everyone to start, especially when you're learning the high school rules. But same with pro rules. In any camp,
they're going to say, when you're explaining something, learn to use rulebook terminology. Rulebook terminology. Well, where is all that rulebook terminology founded? In Rule 2. It's founded in, talking about pitching requirements. Okay, you can read Rule 6. Start with Rule 2. Rule 2 will help inform and give you the vocabulary you need as a baseline to explain it. And then those other rules will, expand on it and help you grow from there. But if you don't know what the definition of a word is, it makes it harder for you to explain it to someone else. So just start with the definition.
Well, that's great. Jesse, it's been good having you on here. I think we brought a lot of good topics in. We'll certainly have to do this again, bring you on, because it was a fun conversation. So I guess I'll say I appreciate you joining, and hopefully we'll do it again soon.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate everything that you're doing, all the YouTube stuff, people, because I'm connected to some social media forums as well. They ask me a lot about the stuff and, want to connect the dots. And video is great, but when it comes to video training, you do a great job. Even if you use, like a professional video, you do a great job, especially trying to refocus that in on the high school rule. We got to focus this on the high school rule, the high school interpretation. And that's great. You can use major league stuff, focus on the rule at hand for the training that you're working for that game, that day, that week, that season. So great job, and I applaud you for that.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, don't assume the MLB rule applies to your high school game, because it very likely doesn't.
No chance.
Awesome. Well, Jesse, I appreciate you coming on. I'm going to hit stop on the recording here, but we'll bring you again soon.